Why do some people fundamentally misunderstand atheism? Also, why do they baselessly hate the position? Today, we will be answering both of these questions as we dive into a video where the presenter unjustifiably hates atheism. Today, we'll be answering both of those questions as we dive into a video where the presenter unjustifiably hates atheism. She seems to attach a lot of unnecessary baggage to the atheist position that just isn't warranted in favor of magical thinking. If you want to fuck around and find out why the YouTuber Godless hates atheism with a passion, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we are going to be analyzing a video by a YouTuber named Godless where she tries to warn people of the dangers of atheism. Atheism isn't dangerous. It's just simply not being convinced that a God exists, and therefore you don't believe in a God. How is that dangerous? But in this video, Godless is taking a very specific position of arguing for the Judeo-Christian God. So I will be taking the harder atheist position, claiming that that God, the Judeo-Christian God, simply doesn't exist at all and can't exist if it is as described in the Bible. Now, I will say that there are some political topics that come up, so if you don't like my political content or how fucking liberal I am, then you might as well just leave the video now. All right, now that all the conservative dipshits have left the video, I'm going to show you why Godless is illogical in her analysis of atheism. And regardless of whether or not some God out there does exist, you definitely shouldn't believe Godless's bullshit. All right, let's get into this dumb fucking video.
Do you hate child abuse? What about gang violence? Do you hate that? Maybe you hate school shootings. Perhaps you hate murder in general, taking an innocent life. What about that? What about child mutilation? Do you hate the sexualization of children? Or maybe you hate sex trafficking in general. Do you hate communism? If you answered yes to any of these questions, and I could keep going, but if you answered yes, then you should also hate atheism.
I don't understand how any of those topics are connected to atheism. The mere lack of belief in a God or somebody just simply not believing in a God has nothing to do with anything that she just mentioned. And I really don't know what else there is to say about this bullshit.
Now, let me make myself very clear. I didn't say you should hate atheists. What I said is you should hate atheism.
Oh, okay. Well, usually when people say that they hate atheism in the way that Godless has, they are using that as a reason to sling shit in the atheist direction. And it's also used as a shield for assholes that want to treat atheists like shit. This is like some conservative dipshit screaming about protecting children from drag shows, while at the same time not really giving a shit about protecting children from school shootings. Something tells me that there's not a lot of kids dying at fucking drag shows, but boy, conservatives want to keep their guns, so if Timmy has to die, then Timmy has to die. If he dies, he dies.
Why is this important? As most of you know, I used to be a Democrat. I used to support political candidates based on my feelings, based on my skin color, based on what the social consensus was of the group that I surrounded myself with. Now, I walked away from the left back in 2020, and although I started to really resonate with a lot of the opinions of people that had more of a right-leaning perspective, essentially I got red-pilled.
Ah, so you're a dipshit. That makes this entire video make sense. Just like I don't understand why somebody would think that I would become religious, I also don't understand why anybody would be red-pilled. Conservatives are convinced by conservative politicians to vote against their own interests. Basically, this is what happens when conservatives vote. Hey there, constituent. I'm gonna be passing a bill that allows me to punch you directly in the face whenever I want to. Would you vote for me, please? Well, I don't know. What's your stance on abortion? Oh, abortion is murder, most definitely. And I will be passing legislation to stop it. Well, shit. I'm in a predicament here. I mean, yeah, I guess I'll vote for you even though you're gonna punch me relentlessly in the face every single day because of the law that you're gonna pass. I'm perfectly fine with that. I will vote for you, sir. I'm not sorry. I will never fucking do that. Furthermore, I have way too much love for my community to do something as dipshitty as being a conservative. Conservatives will use the welfare of children in order to advance their own ideologies, while at the same time actively voting against measures that would help children, like reducing access to the free lunch program or protecting children from gun violence. I mean, just consider it. Ted Cruz wanted to turn every school in America into a literal death trap by only having one entrance and exit to the entire school before he'd even consider doing anything about reducing the gun violence problem. Conservatives will also use the excuse that mental health is the problem and not the guns. Yet, when given the chance to actively do something about the mental health problem, they unanimously agreed not to do anything. I mean, seriously, being red-pilled at this point is publicly admitting that you're a dumbass.
If you don't know, that's the official term. I got red-pilled. And although I really resonated with a lot of these ideas, I noticed something very early on. I kept finding myself butting heads with a lot of people that were essentially on the same side, right? We shared the same core beliefs as it came to the red pill movement, with the exception of certain issues that all tied back to morality.
I'm not surprised that she had issues with morality. I've come to find that most conservatives out there have a real tough time processing anything more complex than a pure dichotomy when it comes to certain issues. And if it's not one of their preferred positions, then it has to be a hard dichotomy. So her having moral conflicts with other conservatives really isn't surprising to me.
So let me give you an example. There was this one YouTuber, I thought we were cool, and then all of a sudden this person starts screaming at me on social media because I started to become more outspoken about how I was against abortion. So all that to say, despite me taking the red pill, I came to the realization that the red pill cannot provide us with objective morality.
Well, right. The whole red pill thing is about your political positions on social issues, which may or may not have some kind of connection to your moral values. And one of the fundamentals of conservative logic is to reject all scientific information for their preferred conclusions. Essentially, they experience cognitive dissonance. And instead of working this new scientific information into their worldview, they resoundingly reject it in favor of their emotionally preferred information. So for instance, with abortion, I would say most conservatives out there claim that abortion is bad just because they prefer to view a fetus as a baby. Despite the philosophical and scientific reasons as to why you shouldn't consider a fetus a baby, conservatives continue to believe that at the moment of conception, a zygote is a baby. And they only prefer this position because it works for their narrative. Conservatives also resoundingly reject any kind of scientific information that shows that abortion is much needed health care. And as we have seen since Roe was overturned, without it, people are at a higher health risk. Conservatives don't give a shit about this because they are more concerned about forcing people to have babies than they are about providing good health care. They also seem to prefer false narratives about people that get abortions rather than looking at the hard scientific data. They regularly reject this scientific information in lieu of their emotionally preferred conclusion. At the heart of all of this is their need to control other people's lives and force them to live a conservative lifestyle.
So now we get into the territory of, well, hold on, Gothics. You don't need to believe in God to know what's right and what's wrong. For example, murder. We all know murder is wrong, so you don't need God to tell you that. Yeah, sure, you don't need to know God to know that murder is wrong, but you have no way of justifying it.
Sure, we have several ways of justifying how murder is wrong. You could appeal to our collective agreement on basic human rights, which would include the right to life. There's also social contract theory, which is a centerpiece for a functioning society, where citizens agree that actions like murder are not in the best interest of the society. You could also justify murder as being bad or wrong because of the effect that it has on society. Overall, it increases suffering and negatively affects the well-being of people in that society. Another way to ground it is in the evolution of a social species. A social species would require group cooperation in order to survive. Murder would be antithetical to this, so it's an unwanted behavior. Empathy and compassion also factor into the evolution of a social species. So my point is that there are several ways in which we can ground murder as being bad, wrong, or unwanted in general without the need to invoke a god. I think that the better question to ask here is, how can Christianity actually justify murder being wrong? Now, I can see how a Christian can make a coherent argument that not following God's orders is wrong or bad or unwanted behavior, but that doesn't actually go hand in hand with moral conclusions. For example, with murder, God does say that thou shalt not murder. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't kill, and it also doesn't always apply to actions between Israelites. What it means is that thou shalt not murder. Unless God says that it's okay to murder, then you should go out there and definitely murder the fuck out of them. Also, a bit uncomfortably, after God issues this command of thou shalt not murder, or in some instances, in some Bible versions, it's thou shalt not kill, God directly orders the Israelites to go out and kill a lot of people. Like, to the point of, you could call it genocide. Numbers 31 is a prime example of God ordering the Israelites to go out and commit a genocide against another group of people, the Midianites. And the only offense that the Midianites committed was mingling with the Israelites. Fucking around and finding out, basically. So as a Christian, basing your moral conclusions on the Bible, I feel like the best thing that you can say is, it's wrong to murder someone unless God says that it's okay to murder someone. Then it's actually fine to murder them. By the way, you can also kill anyone that doesn't also worship Yahweh, which is a hell of an asterisk to put by thou shalt not murder.
Now, for those that don't know, the Bible is considered the Word of God. So all of the moral laws, all of the values, the principles, essentially the instruction manual for the creation, us. We're intended to live our life in a particular way, and the Bible gives us insight as to how we're supposed to live our life.
Let me rephrase this a little bit here. The Bible gives you insight on how you are to live your life, not somebody that doesn't follow your bullshit. The way that she presented this was as if the Bible is supposed to be the end all be all to how people are supposed to act in a society in general. It's not. Also, really the only moral laws that God lays down in the Bible are, hey, things that I like are good. They're morally good. And it's morally bad to disagree or disobey me. So really, you should just do what God likes, like what he wants you to do, because then you'll be taken care of. If you don't, well then, bad shit's gonna happen to you. Framing it in this way helps us easily identify that what we consider moral and immoral is divorced from what God likes and doesn't like. Conservative Christians end up changing the idea of morality to be something that's not even connected to morality.
So before I unpack this, I want to first start off by establishing a few principles found in the Bible. In Romans 2:15, it talks about how the law is written on our hearts. Most of us understand right and wrong. Most of us understand that murder is wrong in particular, since we're talking about this example. But the problem is our conscience was distorted as a result of the fall when Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit that God explicitly told them not to eat. Which is why, for example, I think abortion is child sacrifice and other people think abortion is healthcare.
Well, first of all, God doesn't inherently have a problem with child sacrifice, as long as it's done for him. The story of Jephthah and his daughter makes this painfully obvious. If you're unaware of this story, it's a loving story where Jephthah leaves his family to go and fight for God against God's enemies. And before he goes in to fight God's enemies, Jephthah makes a promise to God. He pinky swears with God. He's like, God, I will pinky swear with you that if you help me defeat these people, because I'm way understaffed back here, that's how you kind of prefer it. If you help me defeat them, then I will sacrifice the first thing that runs out of my house and greets me. Pinky swear, God? And then God, fully knowing what is about to happen, pinky swears with Jephthah. Yeah, promise, bro. I'll do it. Just make sure you burn whatever comes out of your house. And so obviously Jephthah's going to win against God's enemies because God helps him in some kind of way. I don't know. He like sprinkles some kind of like magical dust on them and they become invincible. They kill everybody. I don't know. Again, with the killing, you know, justifying killing or murder as being wrong. You know, just sprinkle a little bit of that God dust on it and it makes it all right. So anyways, Jephthah, after having won, comes back home. And guess what is the first thing to run out of his house? His daughter. His daughter runs out of his house. And so Jephthah then has to explain to his daughter, like, look, I pinky sweared with God. I'm going to have to kill you and burn your body. And the story actually has the daughter say, Daddy, don't break your promise with God. Just give me a month to frolic in the fields, and then you can sacrifice my body. And so Jephthah gives her a month to frolic in the fields or whatever in the fuck, and then he has to kill her and burn her body. Now, the story doesn't specifically say that she was burned alive. I mean, he probably killed her and then burned her body, but it's neither here nor there. The fact is that God willfully accepted a child sacrifice in order to please him because, you know, he loves the smell of burning meat. And typically with the sacrifices, you have to, like, you know, rip the entrails out of whatever thing that you're sacrificing and you burn the entrails and all this other stuff. God does not have a problem with child sacrifice as long as the child being sacrificed is being sacrificed specifically for him. And then second part of this particular section, if God has truly written the law in our hearts, then why has this law changed so many times over the years? The moral law that was written on the heart of Paul and the other New Testament authors definitely included the fact that you could own other people as slaves, chattel slavery. In fact, that was actually the law that was written on everybody's heart until slavery, at least in the Americas, was abolished in 1865. And even then, the law written on our hearts didn't exactly go away. It just receded a little bit into prejudice and segregation. And even to this day, there's still a prejudice against minority groups. But also this law that she's talking about, it also prescribes abortion in some situations. Also, this law she claims is written on our hearts includes the murder of LGBTQ plus individuals. Remember that asterisk that we had on Exodus 20:13, thou shalt not murder. This is one of those exceptions.
Now, this is why we need a savior, because what that means is regardless of how good of a person you think you are, you're still going to do wrong in your life. And this, my friends, is precisely why Jesus Christ came to die on the cross, so he could offer us free salvation and we can live in the kingdom of heaven for all eternity when we die. Assuming, of course, we truly believe this and repent of our sins. Without that, we're going to hell. So, how do we really know what's right and what's wrong?
Before we get to determining what's right and wrong, let's talk about the very basic understanding of Christianity. Why did Jesus need to be sacrificed in the first place? How exactly does sacrificing Jesus accomplish anything in reality? This all seems very ad hoc to me. There is simply no explanation as to why human sacrifice is needed. And there's no evidence that sin actually exists. These claims about heaven and hell existing are just that. They're claims. And there's no evidential support for either of those planes of existence. The basic Christian theology has God being unable to change his mind about sin unless he killed himself as a sacrifice to himself for the shit that he planned on humans doing in the first place. How is this convincing to anybody with a reasonable sense of logic? Okay, so now Gothics is going to try to provide us with a good methodology for distinguishing between morally good and morally bad actions.
This is where the Word of God comes in. And this is also why it's extremely important for Christians to read and understand their Bible, to not fall into the trap of conforming to the patterns of this world. Creating our own standards for morality is extremely flawed. We see it with, as I said, the abortion debate. Apparently, murdering your baby is morally okay.
Okay, abortion is not murdering a child. Let's take a look at the CDC's abortion surveillance report from 2021, specifically the section that describes when abortions are taking place. In 2021, the majority, 80.8%, of abortions were performed at less than 9 weeks gestation, and nearly all, 93.5%, were performed at less than 13 weeks gestation. During 2012 to 2021, the percentage of abortions performed at greater than 13 weeks gestation remained less than 8.7%. In 2021, the highest percentage of abortions were performed by early medical abortion at less than 9 weeks gestation, 53%, followed by surgical abortion at less than 13 weeks gestation, 37.6%, and surgical abortion at greater than 13 weeks gestation, 6.4%, and medication abortion at greater than 9 weeks gestation, 3%. All other methods were uncommon, less than 0.1%. Among those that were eligible less than 9 weeks gestation, 66.6% of abortions were early medical abortions. In 2020, the most recent year for which the PMSS data were reviewed for pregnancy-related deaths, 6 women died as a result of complications from legal induced abortion. Abortion Surveillance United States 2021 MMWR CDC report. This means that an overwhelming majority of abortions that are performed are medicinal abortions. This means that women take one pill to block a pregnancy hormone. This effectively halts the growth of the pregnancy. Another pill is then taken, causing the uterus to contract and expel the pregnancy. This process is basically a miscarriage. This is not murder. If it were murder, then God would be the most prolific murderer of all time. And I mean, that's just from considering the miscarriages that have happened in the past. That's not even considering all the people that God has directly killed. Of course, people like Gothics would explain God's actions by being God himself. They would specially plead that God is special in this respect. He created life so he can take life. No, that does not logically follow at all. If murder is absolutely bad, then God murdering somebody or killing anybody is bad. And if God cannot be bad, then your God simply doesn't exist. And I want to be clear, I think that it's fine that Gothics doesn't want to have an abortion or be with anybody that would want an abortion. But that's not what she's advocating for. She's advocating for taking that right away from other individuals. Other individuals who it's their right to healthcare. Or at least they should have that right to healthcare. She thinks that anybody that gets an abortion is committing infanticide, and it's just simply not. Also, conservatives, like Gothics, making it harder to obtain needed medical services like abortion actually cause more later-term abortions to occur. Studies have shown that in areas where medical services and sex education are easily accessible, later-term abortion rates plummet. This study shows that restricting access to abortion services actually causes more later-term abortions. And this study shows that when Texas seriously restricted the access to later-term abortions, it only caused a quadrupling of people accessing these services in the areas around Texas. So conservatives, and Gothics here wanting to restrict access to medical services like abortion just because they think it's murder will only cause more later term abortions, which is riskier and more painful for pregnant people.
We see it with the transgenderism ideology, apparently encouraging people to mutilate themselves because they believe they were born in the wrong body or they believe they're actually the opposite sex is morally right.
One of the things that I really like about liberalism is that primarily it seems to want to allow people the freedom to reasonably live the way that they want to live. This differs starkly from modern conservatives because they seem to want this freedom for themselves, but they also want to force their lifestyle on everybody else. It's essentially their way or the highway. Conservatives often perceive protecting the rights of everybody as forcing them to do things that they just don't want to do. And what they want to do is to continue to oppress certain minority groups as well as force their will on the wider population. So sometimes conservatives are literally forced to do something they don't want to do, like serve the black couple in their restaurant or allow the gay couple to purchase a wedding cake. And then what they'll do is they'll conflate literally being forced to treat everybody equally with inconsequential things, at least inconsequential to them. Like, for instance, drag queens and trans people simply existing. That doesn't affect them in any kind of way. And Gothics' rant here about trans people is an instance of the latter. Now, there are some outliers out there that try to force individuals into becoming trans, but it would be a composition fallacy to then claim that these outliers set the tone for liberals as a whole. And I just want to stop real quick. None of this has anything to do with atheism. I don't know why this is titled about the dangers of atheism or anything, but so far, like, other than at the very beginning where she talks about atheism, nothing else has really been concerned with atheism. This is a total shit show of a video, but I'm here to refute all of it. Back to the issue of people being forced to become trans. There are outliers out there, like the fuckhead that runs the Twin Flames cult. He has forced people to become trans, and he's successfully convinced people to become trans even though they weren't trans before. And that is wrong. That's why I called him a fuckhead. The actual process that someone goes through when they are considering transitioning is a much more complicated and calculated action. They speak to a wide range of professionals, including counselors, psychologists, doctors, and they speak to them about what is the best regimen for them. Now, I'm not trying to portray myself as some kind of expert on this process or anything like that. There are a lot of great creators in this space to talk to you about those things and explain those things to you. There's even a call-in show on the line. Y'all know I'm on the line sometimes. There's actually a show where you can actually talk to a trans person. But what I do know about this process is that it's not bodily mutilation and decisions are not just made on a whim. I do think that it's morally right to allow someone to freely live as long as it doesn't infringe on the rights, freedoms, and well-being of other individuals. So, sex and gender identity are very complicated topics. And if someone happens to identify as a different gender, then they are not violating anyone's rights, freedoms, or well-being. So yes, it is morally right and okay for trans people to fucking exist.
The same can be said about exposing a child to sexually explicit material, including a drag show, a pride parade. Teaching them how to pleasure themselves, because apparently that's a curriculum that kids really need to know in school.
I don't know of any curriculum that is specifically teaching kids to pleasure themselves. I have seen some materials that have been generated in order to help explain to children certain feelings they might be having and to teach them about their bodies. There was this incident in 2017 where a parent got extremely angry over the fact that their child was in a sex education class where some sexual acts were talked about, like just listed. They were in a comma-separated list. But this course that she's so extremely angry about is actually generated by a faith-based pregnancy crisis center, which is a clusterfuck of a topic all on its own. And if you want to know more about pregnancy crisis centers, why they're bullshit, I'd suggest you watch this John Oliver book.
But tonight, We're going to focus on the exact opposite of an abortion clinic, something called a crisis pregnancy centre. Facilities whose primary purpose is to talk women out of terminating a pregnancy, something they don't often make that clear.
And this curriculum that this parent was upset over really just listed off these things as stuff that exists. And my opinion on this topic in general is that knowledge is power. I think it would be best if we could educate kids about sex as early as reasonably possible and by professionals. This will only help protect kids from being sexually exploited as well as from making poor decisions later in life. I feel like conservatives want to keep kids in the dark about sex education for as long as possible, and it's due to this sex phobia that's deeply ingrained in Judeo-Christian principles. And this will only hurt kids, as it has been shown to in the past. And the fact that there are literally kids out there that think that you can get pregnant from a toilet seat is evidence of this. Hiding this information from kids only leaves them open to being sexually exploited. And due to the stigma that conservatives place on sex, kids are less likely to inform proper authorities or the proper individuals about this exploitation. Of course, all of this makes sense in the conservative space when you have people like Matt Gaetz in public office. And he's only just now being investigated for the sexual exploitation of minors. And this is after the Justice Department refused to charge Matt Gaetz in their sex trafficking investigation. And then, of course, you have the several times in several conservative states that the conservative lawmakers have repeatedly affirmed the right to marry children. It seems like conservatives want to keep kids in the dark about sex education because that makes them inherently easily exploitable. And liberals are only a problem in this area of educating children on sex because we actually want to protect children from being sexually exploited. And that hurts the conservative agenda. Apparently. Also, in this section, she kind of leaves the term sexually explicit a bit vague and open to interpretation. She does mention drag shows, but for the most part, those are not sexually explicit. And if they are, or they happen to be, then they would be restricted to adults only. And of course, Gothics, being a Christian, she would find things to be too sexually explicit that aren't actually sexually explicit. Like showing shoulders and blaming women for the perverse thoughts of men. In fact, conservatives like Gothics are the ones that are forcing the sexually explicit nature on drag shows. And of course, this harkens back to what we've been talking about this entire time. Conservatives wanting to force their will on the wider public, forcing the wider public to conform to their conservative ideals, because only their conservative ideals are the right ideals. I mean, it's literally all about control to them. That's all that they care about.
Who's to say these concepts aren't morally good? If we're setting the standards on our own, then this is what we end up with. The same can be said about rapists, thieves, murderers. They're setting their own standards, right?
Like I laid out in this video, conservatives, they set their own moral standards as well. It's just as subjective as she's claiming that our moral standards are subjective. There has never been an absolute set of moral standards, not even in Christianity. And the moral foundations of Judeo-Christian principles have changed several times over the ages. The moral foundation of Judeo-Christian principles has definitely changed, especially since the founding of the United States of America, but also since the inception of Judaism itself. Conservatives choose whatever set of moral principles helps advance whatever cause they are working towards. If that's installing a fascist Oompa Loompa, then rape, infidelity, and lying are morally fine. Again, conservatives don't care about what is morally good. They only seem to care about what will help their agenda. So Gothics implying that subjectively defining your morals makes it impossible for you to objectively condemn certain actions is bogus. If that were the case, then she would be in no better position to condemn these actions than we are. The big difference in this morality discussion is that she's being told what she should think by somebody somebody else, whether that be God or the fuck that's reading the Bible and telling her what to think, while more liberally minded people have enough sense to figure this shit out themselves. That's gonna be it for me today. This was only part of Gothix's video. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you thought about this first part of her video. I'd really love to hear what y'all think. While you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.